At 31, I'm a single mother to Gregory, a bright but asthma-prone 7-year-old who depends on me for everything. My days are an endless juggling act between working overtime at a thankless administrative job and ensuring my son's medical needs don't bankrupt us. The bills pile up faster than I can pay them: asthma medication, rent, groceries, and every paycheck feels like throwing a bucket of water into an ocean of debt. Meanwhile, my parents live just 25 minutes away in a suburban paradise, dining out 3 times a week, taking weekend trips to their lake house, and basking in the kind of comfort I can only dream of. Yet when Gregory fell ill last winter, they refused to help, claiming their busy schedule was more important than their grandson's health. I often find myself skipping meals, not because I'm too busy, but because there simply isn't enough money left after covering Gregory's prescriptions. Some nights, as I sit alone in our cramped apartment eating instant noodles, I wonder how my parents sleep so soundly knowing they've turned their backs on their own daughter and grandson. Their selfishness isn't just neglect. It's a calculated indifference that cuts deeper with each passing year. While I work double shifts to cover for absent colleagues, they sip wine by the fireplace, completely oblivious, or perhaps uncaring about the storm raging in my life. This stark contrast between their privilege and my struggle fuels a quiet rage within me, one that grows stronger with every unanswered cry for help. The night before the interview, I barely slept. Gregory's fever spiked to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and his coughs echoed through our tiny apartment like a relentless drumbeat of despair. I sat by his bed, pressing a cold washcloth to his forehead, whispering reassurances I didn't even believe myself. My mind raced not just with worry for my son, but with the crushing realization that tomorrow's interview was slipping further out of reach. For 6 months, I had sacrificed every spare moment, staying late at work, taking on extra projects, perfecting my skills. This promotion wasn't just a raise. It was hope wrapped in numbers, a chance to breathe again after years of suffocating under bills and responsibilities. By morning, Gregory was no better. His breathing sounded labored, and he clung to me as though sensing my growing panic. Desperation clawed at my chest as I dialed my mother's number. Each ring felt like an eternity until her voice finally came through calm, detached, almost bored. "Mom," I began, my voice trembling. "Gregory's sick. He can't go to school tomorrow. I need you to watch him for 2 hours during my interview." Just 2 hours. There was silence on the other end, long enough for doubt to creep in. Then she sighed, the kind of sigh that carried decades of passive aggression, and said, "Honey, your father and I have plans this weekend. You know how these things are. Besides, isn't handling situations like this part of being a mother?" Her words hit me like a slap, sharp and stinging. "Plans? Mom, this is my career we're talking about. It's 2 hours." I pleaded, hating how desperate I sounded. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she replied, her tone icy despite the sugary words. "We all have our priorities. Maybe next time you'll think twice before taking on so much." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. Next time? There wouldn't be a next time not for this opportunity. All those nights burning the candle at both ends, all the times I skipped meals or ignored my own exhaustion, it was all crumbling into dust because they couldn't spare 2 hours. I collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down my face. Betrayal burned in my throat alongside the bitter taste of failure. How could they do this? They lived comfortably, indulging in dinners and weekend getaways while I scraped by, trying to build a future for Gregory. And now, when I needed them most, they turned their backs without hesitation. That night, as Gregory finally drifted off to sleep, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every missed opportunity for support over the years. By dawn, I knew what I had to do, but the weight of it crushed me. I called HR, withdrew from consideration, and hung up feeling like I just signed away my last shred of hope. After I missed the promotion, my parents didn't just stop at refusing to help, they turned it into a twisted game of guilt and manipulation. The same people who had ignored Gregory's fever and my desperate, pleas for 2 hours of childcare suddenly became experts on how I was failing as a mother. "You're too ambitious," my mom sneered over the phone the next day, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you hadn't been so focused on climbing that corporate ladder, maybe you wouldn't have let your son get sick in the first place." Her words hit like daggers, not because they were true, but because she said them knowing exactly how vulnerable I felt. And then came the text constant reminders about their so-called financial struggles. A screenshot of an overdue credit card bill arrived 3 days later, accompanied by a passive-aggressive note. "We hate to bother you, but this is urgent." Urgent? These were the same people who posted pictures from fancy dinners and weekend getaways on Facebook just last week. It wasn't enough that they'd sabotaged my chance at stability. Now they wanted me to feel responsible for their lavish lifestyle too. The worst part was how they weaponized family loyalty. "After everything we've done for you," my dad texted one evening, listing every birthday gift and holiday check as if $20 twice a year made up for years of emotional neglect. He ended with, "Is it really too much to ask for some gratitude?" Gratitude? For what? For standing idly by while I juggled work, asthma attacks, and rent payments alone? Their audacity left me shaking with rage. Every message felt like another brick added to the wall of resentment between us. Yet no matter how many times I told them I couldn't afford to help, they kept pushing, finding new ways to make me feel like the villain. They weren't just asking for money, they were punishing me for daring to set boundaries. It started with a single Facebook post. My mother, always the drama queen, uploaded a picture of herself sitting on their couch, her face buried in her hands, with the caption, "Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is watching your child make poor decisions. Praying for guidance during this difficult time." The vagueness was deliberate, just enough to spark curiosity without revealing anything concrete. Within hours, the comments flooded in. Distant relatives, old friends, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, all chimed in with sympathy and judgment. "I can't believe she'd treat you like this after everything you've done for her," one cousin wrote. Another added, "Family should always come first. She'll regret this when it's too late." But that was only the beginning. A few days later, they launched a GoFund campaign titled, "Help 2 seniors stay in their home." The description painted a tragic picture of medical emergencies, unexpected expenses, and imminent homelessness, all lies, of course. They included a photo of their house, the same house they bragged about paying off years ago. The goal? $155,000. Yes, they were asking strangers on the internet to fund their so-called crisis while living comfortably off retirement income and Social Security. Then came the phone calls from my aunt, my dad's bowling buddies, even Gregory's kindergarten teacher who somehow got roped into this mess. Each conversation followed the same script. "Your parents are really struggling. They're heartbroken over how things have turned out. Don't you think you could find it in your heart to help?" It wasn't just guilt. It was a full-blown PR campaign designed to paint me as the villain. And worst of all, it worked at least partially. Gregory started noticing. He'd ask why Grandma and Grandpa weren't coming over anymore, or why they seemed sad whenever he saw them. My heart broke every time I had to dodge his questions, knowing the truth would only confuse him more. And if the emotional manipulation wasn't enough, they escalated to legal threats. One afternoon, as I was helping Gregory with his homework, an official-looking envelope arrived. Inside was a letter from a lawyer demanding I fulfill my financial obligations to my parents under the guise of familial duty. The audacity was staggering. They weren't just trying to shame me into submission, they were weaponizing the law to force me back into their toxic orbit. The pressure mounted daily. Friends began avoiding me, unsure of what to believe. At work, whispers spread through the office after someone showed Andrew a screenshot of my mom's Facebook post. Even Juliet, who had been supportive until now, gave me a concerned look and said, "Maybe there's another side to this story." I felt like I was drowning, not just in their manipulation, but in the weight of everyone else's doubt. Every accusation, every sympathetic glance at my parents' fabricated suffering chipped away at my resolve. But beneath the anger and frustration was something deeper, Fear. Fear that Gregory might grow up believing I was the bad guy, that he'd resent me for keeping him away from his grandparents. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday night, 3 weeks after I'd sent the text telling my parents I couldn't help them financially or otherwise. I thought setting boundaries would be enough, that blocking their numbers and ignoring their emails would create some distance. But they weren't used to being told no, not by me, not by anyone. That night, as Gregory slept soundly in his room, I heard a faint tapping at the window. At first, I convinced myself it was just the wind rattling the glass, or maybe a tree branch brushing against the pane. But then I saw it, 2 shadows moving slowly outside my living room window. My heart froze. I crept closer, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the blinds. There they were, my mom holding her oversized Coach purse, my dad adjusting his glasses like he always does when he's nervous. They were standing on the fire escape, peering into my apartment as though searching for something or someone. My breath caught in my throat. What were they doing here? How had they even gotten onto the fire escape without alerting security? Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and called building management. "There are people outside my window," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. So I wouldn't wake Gregory. The manager, Ariana, promised she'd send someone immediately, but until then, I felt trapped. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the streetlights outside seemed amplified. I locked every door, double-checked the deadbolts, and pulled the curtains shut tightly, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if they tried to force their way in? What if Gregory woke up and saw them? When the security guard finally arrived, my parents were still there, looking both defiant and pitiful. "We just wanted to drop off medicine for Gregory," my mom insisted, her voice laced with faux concern. "It's important." My stomach churned. This wasn't about medicine. It was another attempt to manipulate me, to guilt-trip me into letting them back into our lives. I stood firm, refusing to engage beyond what was necessary. "You can leave whatever it is with the front desk," I said, my tone icy despite the storm raging inside me. "You're not authorized to come here." After they left, escorted by the guard, I collapsed onto the couch, shaking uncontrollably. Blocking their calls had been one thing, cutting off communication felt like drawing a line in the sand. But this invasion of my home, my sanctuary, crossed every boundary I'd ever set. It was terrifying, yes, but also clarifying. For years, I'd let them walk all over me, bending myself into knots to meet their demands while neglecting my own needs and Gregory's. No more. That night, I realized how far I'd come since the days when I believed saying no made me a bad daughter. Setting boundaries wasn't easy. It required courage I didn't know I had, but it was necessary. Necessary for my sanity, for Gregory's safety, and for the future we deserved. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming. A call from Gregory's school during my lunch break shattered my fragile sense of security. "Mrs. Harper, your parents are here to pick up Gregory for a doctor's appointment," the secretary said cheerfully. My stomach dropped. "My parents?" I stammered. "I didn't authorize this." Panic surged through me as I grabbed my coat and rushed out of the office, ignoring Andrew's confused glance. By the time I arrived at the school 20 minutes later, they were waiting in the parking lot, Mom clutching her oversized purse, Dad leaning casually against their SUV like nothing was wrong. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Mom gave me that practiced look of innocence. "We just wanted some quality time with our grandson," she said sweetly, as if kidnapping him from school was perfectly normal. I had to physically block their path when they tried to approach Gregory, who stood frozen near the door, his wide eyes darting between us. That night, he barely spoke, retreating into himself as I tried to explain why Grandma and Grandpa couldn't take him today. But how do you tell an 8-year-old that the people he loves might not have his best interests at heart? Things escalated quickly after that. Rumors began circulating, whispers among teachers and parents about me being unfit. One afternoon, a social worker showed up at my door, asking questions about Gregory's well-being. Someone had reported me for child abuse. The accusation felt like a punch to the gut. How could they twist reality so cruelly? I spent hours gathering evidence, emails, texts, even witness statements from neighbors to prove I wasn't the monster they painted me as. Meanwhile, Gregory started having nightmares, waking up crying because he thought I'd abandoned him too. Watching him suffer broke something inside me, but it also hardened my resolve. If protecting him meant cutting ties completely, then so be it. The interview for my new job was brutal. Sitting across from the hiring manager, I could feel the weight of unspoken truths pressing against me. "Why did you leave your previous position?" she asked, her pen poised over her notepad. My throat tightened. How could I explain without revealing the chaos of my parents' manipulation? "I needed a fresh start," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "A place where I could grow professionally and personally." It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. To my relief, they offered me the role 2 days later. Higher pay, flexible hours, and benefits that actually mattered. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe. Moving into our new apartment felt like stepping into another life. Gregory's eyes lit up as he ran through the front door, his laughter echoing off freshly painted walls. He spent an entire afternoon picking out sheets for his own. Ruma's spaceship-themed comforter he declared the coolest thing ever. Watching him unpack his toys, humming happily to himself, I realized how much we'd both been carrying. Here, there were no shadows of the past lurking outside windows or whispers about who I was supposed to be. Just us, building something new. At work, the transition wasn't easy. The first week was overwhelming: new systems, unfamiliar faces, and lingering self-doubt. But then Juliet, my new colleague, invited me to lunch. Over sandwiches, she shared stories of her own struggles with single parenthood. "You're stronger than you think," she told me with a warm smile. Her kindness became a lifeline, helping me navigate not just the office, but also the lingering scars of everything I'd endured. Slowly, the pieces began falling into place, not perfectly, but enough to remind me that hope wasn't lost. The family meeting was supposed to be a peaceful discussion, but it quickly turned into a courtroom drama with me as both the defendant and the prosecutor. My parents had gathered everyone. Aunt Isla, cousins I hadn't seen in years, even distant relatives who barely remembered my name. The room buzzed with whispers as I walked in late, Gregory clinging to my hand like a lifeline. "We just want to clear the air," my mom announced sweetly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Within minutes, they unleashed their arsenal of accusations, how I'd abandoned them, how I was selfish for prioritizing work over family, how they were the real victims here. Each word felt like a slap, not because it stung, but because they expected others to believe their lies. I stood there, heart pounding, as Gregory squeezed my fingers tighter. For once, I didn't shrink under their manipulation. Instead, I laid out every documented instance of their behavior: the fake GoFund campaign, the unauthorized visits to Gregory's school, the emotional blackmail that left scars deeper than any physical wound. When my dad tried to interrupt, claiming I was exaggerating, I held up my phone and scrolled through screenshots of text, emails, and call logs. The room fell silent. Even Aunt Isla looked uncomfortable. Afterward, I drafted a certified letter with the help of a lawyer, making one thing crystal clear: any attempt to contact Gregory without my explicit permission would result in legal action. It wasn't an empty threat, it was survival. Around the same time, I started therapy. At first, I resisted. Confronting decades of ingrained patterns felt overwhelming. But slowly, I began to understand why I tolerated so much for so long. My therapist called it enmeshment, a toxic dynamic where love and obligation became weapons. Learning this changed everything. Every session felt like peeling back layers of shame and guilt, replacing them with strength and clarity. Protecting Gregory wasn't just about setting boundaries. It was about breaking cycles that had haunted our family for generations. It started with a dramatic scene straight out of a soap opera. My parents invited neighbors, distant relatives, and even their bowling league buddies to what they called an emergency meeting at their house. The living room was packed when I arrived, uninvited, but tipped off by Aunt Isla. Mom sat on the couch, dabbing her eyes with a tissue while Dad paced back and forth like a man wronged. "We just want our daughter to know how much we've sacrificed for her," Mom declared tearfully, holding up a crumpled list detailing every expense they'd ever incurred on my behalf. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd as she added, "And now in our old age, she turns her back on us." But the theatrics didn't stop there. 2 days later, they escalated to something far more sinister, calling the police. When officers showed up at my door, accusing me of neglecting my elderly parents, I felt the floor drop beneath me. Gregory clung to my leg as I calmly explained the situation, showing them documented proof of my parents' manipulative behavior. Thankfully, without concrete evidence, the case was dismissed, but not before leaving me shaken and Gregory confused about why Grandma and Grandpa would make such claims. Amidst all this chaos, something unexpected happened. About a month later, Dad called not with accusations or guilt trips, but with news that caught me off guard. "Your mom has started seeing a therapist," he said quietly, almost hesitantly. Apparently, after months of failed attempts to regain control over me, a minor health scare had forced her into therapy. At first, I was skeptical, was this another ploy? But then Dad mentioned specific things she'd been working on, recognizing patterns of manipulation, understanding emotional blackmail, and taking responsibility for past actions. "She's starting to see things differently," he admitted, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. There was no grand apology, no promises of overnight transformation, just a tentative acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they were ready to change. Still, I couldn't let my guard down completely. Too many bridges had burned between us for trust to rebuild so easily. Yet, hearing those words sparked something unfamiliar yet undeniable within me. Hope. Hope that perhaps one day we could find common ground not as adversaries, but as family. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday morning, 6 months after I'd last seen them in person. It was my dad, his voice softer, less demanding than before. "Your mom's been trying," he started hesitantly. "She's seeing someone, a therapist. They're working through things." My heart sank as memories of their manipulation flooded back. The fake GoFund, the staged emotional breakdowns, the relentless guilt trips. But there was something different this time, a vulnerability in his tone that felt unfamiliar yet genuine. He didn't ask for money or demand access to Gregory. Instead, he simply said, "We miss you both." For weeks, I wrestled with what to do. Moving had been my way of reclaiming control, a fresh start in a neighborhood where they couldn't just show up unannounced. Yet here they were, extending an olive branch, however fragile it seemed. I thought about Gregory, who still asked about his grandparents during quiet moments, and how much he deserved answers I wasn't sure I could give. Finally, I responded not with promises, but with boundaries. "If we rebuild anything," I told him firmly, "it has to be on my terms. Email updates only. No visits. No discussions about finances." Their reply surprised me. For once, they didn't argue or try to negotiate. Instead, my dad sent a brief email the next day. "Thank you for considering this. We understand we have a lot to prove." The words felt hollow yet hopeful, like planting seeds in uncertain soil. Could people really change? Or was this another calculated move to regain influence over my life? I decided to move again, not out of fear, but because distance had given me clarity. Our new apartment wasn't perfect. The kitchen faucet dripped incessantly, and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing, but it was ours. A clean slate. As Gregory unpacked his belongings, humming happily, I realized that true peace doesn't come from waiting for others to change. It comes from building a life strong enough to withstand whatever storms may follow. There were nights when the silence felt heavier than the chaos. Lying awake, I'd replay every decision, every boundary I'd drawn, and wonder if I'd been too harsh. Was it wrong to shut them out so completely? What if Gregory grew up resenting me for keeping him from his grandparents? The questions haunted me, circling endlessly like a storm I couldn't escape. But then I'd look at him sleeping peacefully in his new room, surrounded by toys he'd chosen himself, and remember why I'd fought so hard. This wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. About giving us both a chance to breathe without fear of manipulation or guilt. The fear didn't vanish overnight. Even now, there are moments when doubt creeps in a text from Dad that's slightly too casual, a birthday card with Mom's handwriting that feels almost sincere. Yet, something inside me has shifted. Where once I saw weakness, I now see strength. Saying no wasn't easy, it required courage I didn't know I had, but it taught me something invaluable. Boundaries aren't barriers. They're bridges. They allow relationships to grow on solid ground rather than quicksand. As I sit here writing this, Gregory is coloring at the kitchen table, humming a tune he learned at school. He looks up occasionally to share his progress, his eyes bright with pride. Watching him reminds me of how far we've come, not just as mother and son, but as survivors of a legacy we refuse to inherit. There will always be challenges ahead, shadows lingering in corners we can't yet see. But for the first time, I feel ready to face them not because I'm invincible, but because I've learned to stand firm even when the ground beneath me shakes. If there's one lesson I hope Gregory takes from all of this, it's that love doesn't mean losing yourself. Sometimes protecting those you care about means standing your ground even when it hurts.